In preparation for talking to you, I was having a look at some resources, and I went to your website, which is called Goldfish Wisdom. So I was just wondering how you came up with that name.
It was basically the least psychological thing that I could think of. So I used to kind of have this thing that I would do when I was running workshops years ago. I'd talk about these 10 kind of basic principles of working with kids, and I just used to call it Goldfish Wisdom because I kind of like I like the simplicity of gold. I mean, I'm making an assumption that goldfish are very simple creatures. They may be doing quantum physics in their little heads. I don't know. But my assumption is they're quite simple little creatures. And it does seem to me that often the problem in life is that we just naturally make things more and more complex. And I think, the solution is to try to find simpler and simpler ways to understand and do things. So yeah, goldfish wisdom came from that.
And I guess that's a good way to deal with stress and other issues we might be having in our lives. To break things down and keep things simple. And obviously, at the moment, we're in the midst of a global pandemic with the coronavirus. Are there any other strategies or suggestions you'd have for people to help manage their stress?
Well, I mean, it's the big things that everybody talks about, right? It's all those basic things like, try and have some good sleep hygiene practices. Exercise is a really good thing to do, all of that sort of stuff. So there's all the basics that kind of everyone knows. But for me, it really is about breaking stuff down into simpler steps. So, I used to have to, in my clinical career, I would often work with incredibly complicated cases. And, there was just years of convoluted stuff going back generations and families. And that stuff was too complicated, and it just got depressing and made me feel stupid because I couldn't come up with a plan. So I would just start breaking it down until I got to the smallest chunk that I could actually do something about. And sometimes it was literally just, well, let's try and make the next supervised access visit a positive experience. And it's like, well, okay, that's a thing we can do. And I think that's kind of true of the world. I think what you have to do is you have to break things down until you get to something that you can do. And do that. I kind of think in some ways rumination is the new kind of depression, like there's lots to ruminate on. There is a lot of health stuff going on. There's all the economic stuff that comes from the health stuff. And you can pretty quickly get lost in all of that. But it doesn't help. And so ruminating and going around and around, not good. I think when you find yourself doing that, you have to stop and step back and find a simple thing and do that.
Yeah, yeah. And you've also talked a bit about calming, and if you are find yourself in a bit of a chaotic situation, or maybe your thoughts are a little bit out of control, just calming things down. How do you actually do that? Are there any specific techniques or?
Yeah, so last year, I think it was last year, it could have been, it feels like everything was like either a year or 10 years ago, I don't know. But at some point before this in the past, we made this neuroscience documentary about the brain. And as part of that, we had to film a sequence where we wanted to show people under extreme stress. And as a rule of thumb, the people that I work with are really nice to everyone else, but like super mean to me. And so Mitchell, who was directing it, found this thing. It's where they do training for if your helicopter crashes in the water, because what happens is they crash, they sink, and then they tip upside down. And so you have to, if you're going to fly in helicopters for kind of work-based stuff, you have to go and do this training. And so normally what would happen is you go along and there's a lecture and a course, and then you sit there in the chair and you practice it just sitting in a chair in an actual room, and you just slowly step out into this metal box in the pool. But because we wanted to film Extreme Panic, we didn't have any lectures, didn't have any courses or stuff. We did it with the proper people, and we had a safety plan, and there was safety divers and stuff. But basically it was just jump on this metal box. You put these blindfolds on so that you can't see, because what happens is helicopters go pitch black almost straight away. And then we had to do this thing, and what happens is it sinks, and so it sinks, then it goes bloop, and then the whole thing tips upside down, and you're in this 5-point harness, and you have to get out. And I also knew, because I know the people, it wasn't actually Mitchell directing the day, it was this guy called Brian. Brian's a nice guy, again, to everybody but me. And so I saw Brian whispering to the safety divers, and I'm pretty sure that he was saying, block the first door that he tries to get out of. And so I knew they were doing everything they could to make it bad. And I was thinking, okay, what's going to let's just stop for a minute, because I was starting to get the whole, oh, heck. And I thought, no, the thing that will get me in trouble was panic, because if you stop and break down the steps, they're actually quite simple. It's go upside down, undo your little seatbelt thing, find a way out, get out. Like, that's not horrendously complicated. So I said to myself, the one thing I'm going to do is when it floods and I tip upside down, I'm going to give myself a second or two just to get myself back into that prefrontal cortex, get myself back into the thinking parts of the brain, calm myself down, and then I'm going to react. And so that's what I did. And when it was kind of flooding up to here, you do feel your heartbeat starting to increase, and then it goes bloop, and then you go upside down, and that's disorienting. But I remember it felt to me like I was sitting there for 20 Zen-like seconds of calm, but it was about, I don't know, a second and a half when I looked at the tape afterwards. But I deliberately made myself stop and just thought to myself, okay, just be calm and think about what you're doing. And of course, what you do when you do that is you rise out of those fight or flight panic parts of your brain. One of the things about self-talk is that it happens up in your cortex, which is where all that information is that you need to get out. And so because of that, I actually felt calmer. Undid my little seatbelt, went to the first window, that was blocked, as I knew it would be, because Brian had been talking to the safety diver. And then, but it still didn't freak me out, because I thought, it's fine. So then I just kind of went out the other side and out through the window. And so for me, I think what it really is about is you just have to be aware that your brain, you can't let your brain just make all the decisions about where you're going. You can't just let it take you where it wants to. And people who find themselves in the middle of a really stressful situation will know that feeling. Things start to go bad, and then all this information is flooding in, and the panic starts to rise, and those feelings start to rise. And so you need to just do that mental pause and step back just for that moment of calm, and then you're able to kind of to react more purposefully. So it is kind of in the immediate moment, it's about making that decision to just stop and kind of step back when you're faced with that immediate onslaught of stuff. And even in the longer term stuff, it is still that it's a longer, slower process of that. So, if things are beginning to overwhelm you, you recognize that that's happening, that your brain's being pulled down the panic and anxiety sinkhole, and you have to stop and step back. And, there are simple physiological techniques that you can do. There's a thing called box breathing, right? It's a great little technique that a police hostage negotiator that I spoke to, he said he would do this as he was walking up to someone on the side of a bridge. Special forces people use this in combat. And what you do basically is you feel yourself starting to panic. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, and then you hold that breath for 4 seconds, and you breathe out for 4 seconds, and you hold that breath for 4 seconds. And then you just kind of repeat that cycle a few times, and it has a calming effect. There's all sorts of complex stuff about your vagal nerve and CO2 that I keep looking up and keep forgetting, but I know there's a really good physiological basis behind it. And it really does work, and then there are bigger things that, are just good for you generally, like meditation and those sorts of things, because they generally help with background anxiety and all that stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, that box breathing technique sounds like a really good thing people can do in the moment.
Yeah.
To have like an immediate effect on their stress or their anxiety.
Yeah, and I use it as a technique. Like, I use the thing, and it was kind of, I remember describing this thing at a conference once, and this really interesting guy had spent 20 years as a negotiator for the police. He came up to me and said, "Yeah, it's great. I used to use it all the time," And it was kind of, it is reassuring when you see people who, like, that's their job, is to negotiate pretty intense, stressful situations. If they're using these techniques, it's because it works. And basically all it's doing is it forces your brain into a particular path, as opposed to just letting your brain go where it wants to go. If you are in the middle of all of this that we've got going on around us at the moment, and you just let your brain make its own decisions about where it's going, it's probably not a good idea. It'll probably end up in anxiety and depression, because that's kind of what the world inspires in you right now.